First, let's start talking about the war, then I will discuss what a huge opportunity that the Axis had in this war and how could they reacted better. The Anglo-Iraqi War of 1941 was a military conflict between the United Kingdom and Iraq. It began on May 2, 1941, when a group of Iraqi officers led by Rashid Ali al-Gilani overthrew the pro-British government of Nouri al-Said. The British responded by sending troops to Iraq, and the war lasted until May 31, 1941, when the Iraqi government surrendered. The anger of the Iraqi people against the British increased in the lead-up to the war. The most important reasons for this anger were: after the end of the Mandate and the granting of independence by the League of Nations in 1932, the prevailing atmosphere in Iraq was one of stability, social cohesion, and a drive towards development, and they saw that the English occupation was dragging Iraq into a war that it is not the best thing to Iraq. The British occupation of Iraq, which many Iraqis saw as a violation of their sovereignty, the British control of Iraq's oil resources, which many Iraqis saw as a form of economic exploitation, the British support for the Hashemite monarchy, which many Iraqis saw as a puppet government. With the development of military operations in Europe and the defeats suffered by the Allies in 1940 and 1941, including the German occupation of France and Italy's entry into the war alongside Germany, demands to end British presence in Iraq and cancellation of the 1930 treaty grew louder. However, Gilani deemed it necessary to follow a carefully calculated policy of non-alignment, which he advocated. The British had a strong impression that Rashid Ali al-Gilani was an opponent of their policies and could not be trusted to achieve their goals. Rashid Ali al-Gilani tried to reassure the British that there was no fundamental change in Iraq's foreign policy. He stated that Iraq was committed to its obligations to Britain, including the Anglo-Iraqi Treaty, in a way that did not violate Iraq's sovereignty and independence. Here are some specific examples of Gilani's efforts to reassure Britain. He issued a statement declaring Iraq's neutrality in the Second World War. He met with the British ambassador to Iraq and assured him that Iraq would not violate the Anglo-Iraqi Treaty. He sent a delegation to Britain to negotiate a new treaty that would be more favorable to Iraq. Gilani's assurances were largely unsuccessful. The strength of each side in the eve of the Anglo-Iraqi War of 1941 was as follows. The Iraqi forces included around 60,000 troops in the army, approximately 100 mostly outdated biplanes in the Air Force, and a small, inconsequential navy. The British forces consisted of about 30,000 troops in the army with reinforcements from India and Palestine, a fleet of approximately 400 aircraft including modern fighters and bombers in the Air Force, and a strong naval presence in the Persian Gulf enabling an effective blockade of Iraq from the sea. The British initiated the war on May 2, 1941, with the Battle of Habbaniyah. In this engagement, the British surprised the Iraqi army by launching an attack during the morning prayers when the Iraqi forces were unprepared. The British heavily relied on their air force, with some pilots conducting over 200 sorties in a single day. Additionally, they targeted Iraqi airfields with airstrikes, causing significant damage to parked aircraft on the ground. This strategic use of air power played a crucial role in the early stages of the conflict. The second battle was the Battle of Fallujah, and it was a victory for the British. The Iraqi army was defeated, and the British were able to capture the city of Fallujah. Following the successful occupation of Fallujah, British forces decided to maintain their momentum and press on towards Baghdad. Under the command of Major General Clark, they faced a challenging situation, with approximately 1,450 troops pitted against an Iraqi defense force numbering around 20,000. However, the British enjoyed a significant advantage in terms of air power. The British advance towards Baghdad commenced on the night of May 27. By May 29, key figures including Rashid Ali, the Grand Mufti, and several members of the National Defense Government had fled to Persia and later to Germany. On the morning of May 31, a significant development occurred and the mayor of Baghdad and a delegation approached British forces at the Washash Bridge. This signaled a potential willingness to negotiate or surrender, marking a turning point in the campaign that ultimately led to the capture of Baghdad and the restoration of a pro-British government. In addition to these major battles, there were also a number of smaller engagements fought during the war and in other parts of Iraq. The casualty figures for the Anglo-Iraqi War of 1941 remain imprecise, with varying estimates. According to the British official history, British losses included approximately 300 killed and 1,000 wounded, but alternative sources suggest higher numbers, with figures reaching up to 1,000 killed and 2,000 wounded. On the Iraqi side, casualty figures are even less certain, with some sources indicating around 10,000 killed and 20,000 wounded, while others claim figures as high as 20,000 killed and 40,000 wounded. Now let's see what was the Axis doing. During the Anglo-Iraqi War of 1941, the Axis powers, primarily Germany and Italy, failed to significantly contribute to the Iraqi war effort. Their support for Iraq was limited and largely ineffective, which is seen as a significant intelligence and strategic failure on the part of the Axis. Before the war, Germany and Italy had provided some military advisors and limited supplies to Iraq, but these contributions were not substantial enough to have a meaningful impact on the outcome of the conflict. Moreover, the timing and execution of these efforts were not well coordinated. The Vichy government in the Levant made a mistake by not joining the war with Iraq against the British, especially since the British had made their hostility towards them clear. The Vichy government had a significant force of around 30,000 soldiers and sufficient aircrafts in the Levant that could have made a lot of impact, especially in the air and on the main supply route used by the British main attack. The route was next to their territory in Transjordan. In hindsight, the Axis powers' failure to make a substantial impact in the Anglo-Iraqi War of 1941 is indeed viewed as an intelligence and strategic shortcoming, as they were unable to exploit the situation to their advantage in the Middle East. So what if the war in Iraq didn't go the way it did? First, it would have given the Axis powers a much-needed source of oil. Iraq had significant oil reserves, and the Axis powers were desperate for oil to fuel their war machine. Second, it would have put more pressure on Egypt, which was also under British control. This could have led to a wider war in the Middle East, which would have diverted Allied resources from the African campaign. Third, it could have changed the relationship between the Axis powers and Iran. Finally, this could have made it easier for the Axis powers to launch attacks on British oil fields and other strategic targets in the region. In my humble opinion, even if the change could have just prolonged the war and attritioned the British. The British would have had to commit more resources to the Middle East, which would have made it more difficult for them to fight the war in other theaters. It is impossible to say for sure what would have happened if the Anglo-Iraqi War of 1941 had gone the other way. However, it is clear that such a victory for the Iraqi government would have had a significant impact on the course of the Second World War and the development of the Middle East. Please, if you agree or disagree, tell me in the comments section. I will be more than happy to see other people's opinion.